talk, girl talk. What's better than girl talk? Girl talk, girl talk. What's better than girl talk? Chat with the ladies about their day, the ups and downs along the way. She's a cook, she's a chauffeur, she's a worker bee. First in the door and last to leave. Girl talk, girl talk. What's better than girl talk? Girl talk, girl talk. What's better than girl talk?
Welcome to Girl Talk. I'm Regina Ayars.
And I'm Carol Voisin.
And Girl Talk is a lively discussion of the opportunities, challenges, and successes of women in their daily lives. We interview women living in the Rogue Valley who are making a difference in our communities. Today we're talking with two women who have recently been elected to local city councils. Our first guest is Tanya Graham, who was elected to the Ashland City Council in 2018. We interviewed Tanya before she was elected, and now she has been on the job for 5 months. Carol, would you like to introduce our guest?
I would. Tanya, would you sort of introduce yourself and tell us how you got here to Ashland, why Ashland, and then tell us a bit about geos, because that's really an important part of your life as well. So if you would just give us that kind of intro to yourself, that would be really helpful.
Great. So I grew up in Nevada, in a small town in Nevada, and then when I went off to college and got my degree, when I was coming back west, I had to decide where I wanted to live. And my sister was living in Ashland at the time with her small children. And so I essentially landed in Ashland because I had family here. And started to do work with local conservation organizations, that sort of thing, and then eventually found opportunities working in that field. And here we are 22 years later, and I am still loving living in Ashland. I work now for the GEOS Institute, and we work to help communities adapt and respond to climate change. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at forests, water systems, and human communities. And the work that I do specifically is to bring climate change projections to communities and then help them think through what that means for them and what they should be doing locally to reduce those impacts, and hopefully over time to do their greenhouse gas emissions work to help pull down those impacts over time.
And you're bringing that perspective to the city council. I see that, when I go down and observe the council. So you're talking about resiliency and climate change, and I really appreciate that because I know our city wants to be on top of that. Yeah.
Exactly, and we've had several really important reports come out, global reports come out that tell us that we just don't have time to waste in dealing with both bringing down our emissions and also dealing with resilience issues. We have already set changes in motion that we have to deal with. So that window for just reducing carbon emissions has closed, and now the work that we have to do has to be bringing down those emissions and then also dealing with the impacts that are underway that we're dealing with as communities.
Well, I observed that you and perhaps other people are using the word resilience now instead of sustainability. That is kind of the word that is that equivalent to sustainability?
There's a sort of a functional difference in that resilience addresses the understanding that we are now in a time where we are facing disturbances that we wouldn't have faced before, and also chronic stressors that weren't in place when the original conversations around sustainability started to happen. Okay. So initially, when we were talking sustainability over the last several decades, it's been about how do we get our systems to where they are able to protect, give us what we need now and also protect that ability for our children. Now, with climate impacts that are either major disruptions or these chronic impacts, we have to figure out how do we maintain the vibrancy and vitality of our communities while dealing with these shocks and stressors that are coming on. And so that's where the resilience piece comes in. Okay. It's really has that response to change element of it that I think wasn't present in the initial sustainability conversations.
Okay. Well, shall we talk about what we came here for, is how you've transitioned into your new role. Carol, have you got a question?
I do. You say in your little piece about who you are on the Ashland website that you want to serve the people of Ashland. What does that mean, and how do you see yourself doing that?
That's a really good question, because Ashland has a very wide diversity of viewpoints. And so how do you serve a group of people who have a variety of different perspectives? And I think we've seen that in a number of the issues that have come up so far. What I try to do with that is to look at both the short and the long-term pieces of this. So anytime that the council puts an ordinance forward or a resolution forward, it will have consequences that ripple out over time. And so I think looking at not only what are we trying to solve in the near term, but what are those impacts over time is really an important piece of it. It's also important to look at how are different types of people or people in different circumstances affected by something. So we have a large number of people here who are struggling to pay for housing costs and those sorts of things. And so how do we balance the needs to do things like infrastructure improvements that we know have a long-term impact on the community, but also recognizing and trying to deal with the fact that that causes short-term difficulties for a certain segment of our population. And so when we think about how to serve the whole community, it's about balancing those needs of short-term, long-term, and then what are the needs of people who have different ability to handle changes in price.
So what did you learn on, the council went out with staff, I think it was on the 6th. Mm-hmm. What did you learn when you went knocking on doors?
That was a really fun experience. They put us into teams and sent us out into certain neighborhoods, and we went to about 20 doors, each team. And you know what we heard primarily in my team that I was with was that people really love living in Ashland. They have concerns around us being able to address our homeless issue for a variety of different reasons. So that was one of the things that came up quite frequently. And then people are concerned about wildfire. That was another strong sort of theme in the conversations that we had with folks. And they wanted to know about our capacity with our firefighters and what else the city thought it might need to do in the wake of the tragedy at Paradise. Mm-hmm. So that's top of mind for a lot of people in town. Mm-hmm.
I took a couple of clips of you at work at council over the last couple of weeks. So can we run one of those clips? I believe it's you responding to the chief of police's report. You just made a comment on that. So can we run that video so we can see Tanya in her council environment? Oh, there it is. Well, that was good. Yeah. I go to a lot of city council meetings, so I feel pretty comfortable there. But one question I have for you, so you've been at work here for 5 months. Mm-hmm. What's the biggest surprise? The thing that you did not anticipate, you weren't prepared for, I don't know, but something that was an eye-opener for you so far?
You know, I think probably the thing that has been, I don't know if it's a surprise, but something that sort of has gotten more of my attention is just that we have different ways of getting information in town, and sometimes you'll get information that's out there that's not actually correct, and it's hard to chase it down. So suddenly our inboxes will fill up with people who are really upset about something. And there's a lot of education in those responses. So I think that that's one of the things that I spend quite a bit of time on when I respond to people, and in helping to try to give them information to help them understand things if they've have a sort of a misunderstanding about what's in front of council. So sometimes people will think that something is a council decision when it's not. And so they're demanding action, and there's really no way for us to give them that action. And so having to, you know, that educational piece of saying, this is, you really need to contact these folks, or this is going to be taken up over here, that sort of thing, I think has been more than I thought it would be, and or I guess I really hadn't thought about how much of that education piece would be in those responses to constituents.
Carol?
So one of the issues that is listed on our website in terms of one of the issues that we're all facing in Ashland is the housing crisis. Would you describe briefly what you think the crisis is and how the council is dealing with it?
Sure. I think the housing crisis has a number of different elements to it. So on one hand, we know that if folks who are in the purchasing market, our house prices are very high, our land prices are very high. So that moves a lot of folks who in other places would be able to afford a standard home in the community, that moves that middle ground of folks to where the living here is often unaffordable. And then that goes all the way down the line, and so it goes into the rental sphere. Our houses, our apartments are renting for hire in Ashland. Across the state they really are, especially along the I-5 corridor, but it's very expensive. If you're just looking for a studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom type apartment, it's very expensive to live here, and part of that is because the vacancy levels are so low. So it really is it's a landlord's market in Ashland at the moment, and it's that same. So we're seeing that trajectory across, and so what ends up happening from that is that people double up in houses. They're sort of stacking into apartments in order to be able to afford them. That type of housing stress then ripples out into all sorts of other parts of the community. Certainly when people are under stress financially, it affects their relationships, it affects their performance at work, it affects how they relate to their children. All of those things can be seen as coming out from that initial housing stress.
Well, one of the ways I see the council and the planning community development trying to deal with this is called infill. And you're hearing from quite a few people, especially on Garfield, where Riverside Church used to be, and on Quincy on Park area Street, where they feel it's really too many units to put in that small space. And so I'm wondering, how are you balancing what citizens are saying that would be out of character, completely out of character for their neighborhood, and yet the developer says, this is the way it's going to be. The planning commission has approved it, and the council also has approved it, so this is the way it's going to be. When neighborhoods are just saying, wait a minute, there's some issues here. So what do you think about that? Because you've made decisions on both of those.
Right. So a couple of the things that the city has been doing, one of them is to update the housing element in our comprehensive plan, and to put more of a focus on how do we create a wide variety of housing types. And that's a really important fundamental step that had to be done, and we did that at the last meeting. We accepted that.
The first reading.
Yeah, the first reading of that. And it's been underway for a couple of years, working with the Housing and Human Services Commission and the Planning Commission. So those foundational elements are really important. Ashland, quite a while ago, decided that it didn't want to expand, it didn't want to sprawl. And because we've kept our urban growth boundary where it is, it tends to push prices up inside of it. And so then when you're looking at infill, one of the ways, or maybe sometimes in certain situations, the only way to get to a housing unit that's affordable given the price of land is to have much higher density. And so that's where there's a tension between density and land prices and people's what they're expecting in their neighborhoods. And so we have heard from folks around issues around parking, around just general congestion. What might this do to our community? The policies
open
that
space is a very serious
is an important one.
Yeah.
Yep. And
in that area.
Yeah. And so people will, they look at where's the nearest local park, how dense is this going to be? There, like I say, there's been a lot of conversation around what does that look like for congestion on streets, and one of the things that we are looking at the city is to make sure that we monitor these early developments and see how that works in terms of those decisions that have been made and what are the impacts, because sometimes decisions get made and then we never really go back and see how did that work. Are we getting the results that we want?
Well, there's a state law, that House Bill 2001, I think it is, where they're going to be changing zoning. That hasn't been approved yet, but that could impact, that'll come down to us at the local level. And you know, more multi-units in R1 zones. So, you know, I agree that we all agree that we need more housing in Ashland that's affordable. I think the housing, that 2001 bill is for the middle income housing that then pushes down, and there's less money available then for low income housing. So those two are related. So they're hoping that if that passes, that might free that up. But
when we mention housing, there's also the issue of homelessness.
Well, and I was going to bring that up as well.
And finding units for, affordable units for those who are homeless. Now, something happened at the last council meeting, and I was surprised that there was no response from counselors, and that was Vanessa Hauk was very concerned about the fact that she was told by Parks and by the city there's no place for them to continue their meals. So for the entire summer, we're not going to have any meals but one, and that's at Uncle Foods at the United Methodist Church. So, and she actually handed back her Ragland Award. Now, I was surprised, and maybe you were surprised too, but that no one said anything. Was just because it was a surprise for everyone?
Well, she came forward during the public forum part of that, and our council rules keep us from asking questions in that particular forum.
But you can make comments. Yeah, you can.
I mean, possibly. You know, we haven't had that be the frame. I was surprised. I was in that moment. I didn't expect that. And because we did have quite a few people coming up and talking to us about that particular situation. And I checked in with Michael Black at the Parks Department about that a couple days before the meeting, and had understood that they still had one day at Pioneer Hall. But reading in the newspaper, it looks like their staging area has been has been a major problem of where they keep their food and their supplies and that sort of thing. And so it's a multi-issue problem. Right, and so now what had been a where can we have the meals is now a where can we have the meals, and also where can their supplies and food and that sort of thing be staged, which makes it, I think, if I understand this correctly, makes them unable to take advantage of Pioneer Hall for the one day that they still have.
They still had a way to do that. I mean, that wasn't the issue, I believe. They were ready and willing and had a place where they could do those meals. So they had things set up for that. It was the fact that now no meals can occur. That's the problem.
I'm not entirely clear on where that particular problem is, whether it's in the staging area because of that eviction, if that's the problem that needs to be addressed first before finding the other places it might be. I know there are conversations happening in churches around town. My church is having that conversation as well about how we might be able to help. It's difficult at the city level because we have so many things that the community needs and wants, and we've just come through this tough budget process, just trying to protect our essential services as best as we could. The housing crisis, as you know, when you have high rents, it makes it even more difficult to transition people who are homeless into housing when it's $800 a month for a studio. That becomes a very, very large obstacle to move people into housing. And so it's part of that overall piece. But the city needs to figure out, and I think we'll be doing that in the next several months, what is the city's appropriate role in these different value services. So for senior services, for homelessness, for climate change, for all of these different issues that we placed on our value service as part of our priority, we need to figure out what is our appropriate role. we've been helping to get the shelter in place over on East Main Street. This larger question now of the meals has brought up another conversation. And I think we haven't sorted out yet what is our role in that yet.
Can we, I wanted to ask another transition question for you as a new counselor. So how do you prepare for a city council meeting? Carol knows well how much paperwork comes before you, and how do you actually prepare for that and feel like you have the knowledge you need in order to make the decisions you might have to make that evening?
I would say read and read
and read
and read and then read some more.
Yeah.
And then ask some questions and then read some more and ask some more questions and read some more. So we get our packets on Wednesday before the next Tuesday's meeting. And so I try to jump on it pretty quickly so that if I have questions of staff, I can ask them and give them enough time to get back to me and have time to read that before we get to the meeting. And so I get in there pretty quickly. And I think it's just true for anybody who's new on the council that a lot of the issues that are coming in front of us are midstream. So the other counselors who've been on longer have a background understanding that the new counselors have to catch up with. And so I think right now that's part of it as well. That should ease up over time as we clear more of those sort of midstream issues.
So was it difficult transitioning into an existing group of people that have been working together for 8 years? There's 3 new counselors on there. Was that difficult? I mean, how did you manage that? Integrate yourself? Are you still doing it?
Yeah, it's been good.
Oh, good.
People, after I won the election, I started to meet with individual counselors, just going to coffee to get to know them a little bit better, and to find out what was important for them in the city, and they were asking those same questions too. People have been very supportive and offering to help if I needed help as I was moving through that transition. I think it's been good, and the city has done a really good job under Kelly Matting's leadership of orienting the new counselors. And so we got training in public meeting laws, we got training in ethics, and that sort of piece, so that we could make sure that we're doing this work right. And then the city did a couple of orientation sessions, gave us a big book to work with, and sent us off to the League of Cities training if we wanted to go. So they've done a good job of helping to make sure that we know how to do the work correctly. And I think that's been a big part of me feeling comfortable saying things right from the beginning, because I think if I hadn't known where those boundaries were, I would have felt like I had to wait and spend more time figuring that out.
Yeah. I think we've got another video that I'd like to run of Tanya at work in the city council. I think this was on the grant. This was for the social services grants, and the housing commission came up. So if we could run that second video.
The only thing that I would add is that working for a nonprofit myself, I know the side of the world of the ask. And having gotten to know a lot of program officers over time and become friends with them, I have learned also the difficulty on the funding side of not being able to grant as much money as you would like, and having to make the very difficult strategic decisions between very worthy organizations. And so I applaud your good work and your strategic work, and I'm happy to be the second on this.
Okay, that was about like the other one, you know, responding to the reports that come before. It's a lot of information. I ran for city council. Carol was a city councilor. So we have, Carol more than I, of course, an appreciation for what happens there.
So Tanya, you mentioned the budget process, which...
we got about 4 minutes left,
okay.
Carol.
So I have a question.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, well, no, I'm going to narrow it down. And there were lots of issues. And the one thing that I noticed at the last meeting, when you voted on, I believe it was either the increases in utility or on the budget, you said something, but I didn't understand it. You said, I really don't like voting on this, but I have to. So can you explain that? Because it's confusing to someone listening to it. I thought, oh, wait a minute. So would you explain that? Could you give a little explanation? So.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
For both the budget and the increases in the utility rates, I didn't like making any of those votes. I voted yes across the board for those. The budget process involved laying people off and involved basically cutting back some level of capacity in the city that was important to have. And so I didn't like voting for that. We also had to take $2 million out of the general fund, which is only fire, police, community development, which is planning, and parks. And so that's a pretty small budget in which to pull $2 million out. And I certainly wasn't happy with having to make those cuts that were necessary, I thought, in order for us to have to do the right thing in terms of financial management. In terms of the utilities, we need to keep investing in our utilities over time, or else we end up handing a huge bill to our children. And we see that in places where people have failed to invest in their infrastructure. And so when we look at these rate increases, they are incorporating what needs to be done at the infrastructure level in order to maintain those systems. And so it is difficult to keep paying more. But one of the things that I was looking at is the comparisons of utility charges across the valley and other places, and we are not actually paying more, say, for our electricity than Talent is on Pacific Power. And so the fact that we had that really strong analysis beforehand that says that this is actually what we need to pay to maintain the system
I'm going to have to interrupt.
was part of why that was.
That's all the time we have today on Girl Talk. And we'd like to thank our guest, Tanya Graham, City Council member, for joining us today. Carol, you want to thank the volunteer crew?
I do. I want to thank Wanda, director, John with graphics, David, teleprompter and audio, thank you, and Gary, camera and floor manager, JC, camera and lighting, and camera, thank you. Did I forget anyone?
Yes, Alexis and
Oh,
Aroldi.
Alexa, yes,
King,
thank
yes,
you as
yes, on
well. So
camera and,
without our volunteer
audio.
crew, we couldn't do this. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to thank Rogue Valley TV. Girl Talk can be seen on Rogue Valley TV, Channel 15, with Ashland Home Net, or Channel 182 with Spectrum at 3 p.m. on Saturdays and 6:30 on Thursdays, or on demand online with rvtv.sou.edu. Just click on the public access at the top of the page and then search for Girl Talk. And Girl Talk can also be heard live at noon on KSKQ 89.5 FM, broadcasting from Ashland, and 94.1 broadcasting from Medford. And Carol and I will be on Sundays at noon tomorrow. I also have another Rogue Valley program, Getaway Girl, and it's a travel show about why traveling takes you outside of yourself and into other places that can open you to new people, new experiences, and new inspiration. And my most recent show was my trip to Alaska, kayaking and hiking on Ketchikan Bay, so you might want to check that out. We hope you learned something new today and will join us again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Girl Talk.